in the misty dawn of the 17th century, when Europe stood at the threshold between medieval mysticism and modern rationalism, a series of mysterious documents began circulating through the Germanic lands. These papers whispered of a secret brotherhood, an invisible college of enlightened souls who possessed knowledge that could transform both the individual spirit and the collective destiny of humanity. The appearance of these texts would ignite imaginations across the continent and give birth to one of history's most enduring esoteric traditions. The year 1614 marked a pivotal moment in Western occult history when an anonymous pamphlet emerged in the German city of Kassel. This document, bearing the title Fama Fraternitatis, proclaimed the existence of a hidden order founded by a figure known as Christian Rosenkreuz. His very name united the central symbol of Christianity with the ancient emblem of the rose. The timing of this revelation was no accident, appearing as it did during an era of religious upheaval, scientific revolution, and political transformation that would reshape the European consciousness forever. According to the narrative woven through these founding texts, Christian Rosenkreuz was born in 1378 into a noble but impoverished German family. Orphaned at a young age, he found refuge in a monastery where he learned Greek, Latin, and the fundamental principles of Christian theology. Yet even in his youth, this exceptional soul hungered for wisdom that transcended the boundaries of conventional religious instruction. At the age of 16, driven by an inner calling that he could neither resist nor fully understand, he embarked upon a journey that would take him far from the familiar landscapes of his homeland. The pilgrimage, originally intended for Jerusalem, took an unexpected turn in Damascus, where illness forced the young seeker to pause his travels. During his convalescence in this ancient crossroads of civilizations, Rosenkreuz encountered scholars who spoke of a mysterious city called Damkar, hidden somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula. These wise men claimed that in Damkar dwelt sages who possessed a unified knowledge of nature, mathematics, medicine, and the divine sciences that had been fragmented and scattered since ancient times. Abandoning his original destination, Rosenkreuz journeyed to this fabled city where he was received, as the Fama states, as one long expected. The sages of Damkar recognized in this young European a soul prepared to receive their teachings and to carry them back to lands where such wisdom had been forgotten or suppressed. For 3 years, he studied under their guidance, learning Arabic, translating sacred texts, absorbing knowledge of medicine, mathematics, and what would later be called the Hermetic sciences. The education he received in Damkar represented far more than academic learning. The sages initiated him into practical methods of healing that worked with the subtle energies of the human body, mathematical principles that revealed the hidden harmonies of creation, and spiritual practices that could accelerate the evolution of consciousness. Most importantly, they taught him that all knowledge was interconnected, that the same patterns governing the movement of celestial bodies also shaped the growth of plants, the structure of crystals, and the development of human souls. From Damkar, Rosenkreuz traveled to Egypt, where he deepened his understanding of ancient mysteries that had been preserved in that land since time immemorial. He studied in temples where hierophantic traditions maintained connections to wisdom that predated even the pharaohs. In Fez, Morocco, he encountered Islamic mystics and Jewish Kabbalists who had fled persecution in Spain, creating a unique confluence of esoteric traditions. Each location added layers to his understanding, yet he perceived that all these streams of wisdom ultimately flowed from a single source. After years of wandering and learning, Rosenkreuz returned to Germany around 1407, his mind illuminated and his heart burning with a mission. He attempted to share his knowledge with the learned men of his homeland, approaching scholars, physicians, and theologians with offers to teach them arts that could revolutionize their fields. Yet, he found them entrenched in their traditional ways, suspicious of foreign wisdom, and threatened by ideas that challenged their established authorities. The universities, dominated by scholastic philosophy and orthodox theology, had no room for the integrated wisdom he offered. Faced with this rejection, Rosenkreuz chose a different path. Rather than forcing his knowledge upon an unprepared world, he would plant seeds that would germinate when the time was right. He gathered around him a small group of trusted companions, initially just 3 others, whom he initiated into the mysteries he'd learned during his travels. Together, they formed the fraternity of the Rose Cross, bound by sacred oaths to heal the sick without accepting payment, to maintain their anonymity, and to preserve and transmit their knowledge through carefully chosen successors. The fraternity established what they called the House of the Holy Spirit, though whether this was a physical building or a metaphorical description of their spiritual communion remains a matter of debate among historians. Within this sanctuary, they created a complete compendium of their knowledge, written in symbolic language that could be understood only by those possessing the proper keys of interpretation. They developed a philosophical language that could express subtle spiritual concepts with mathematical precision, and they constructed instruments that could demonstrate the invisible forces operating in nature. Each member of the original brotherhood was required to travel throughout Europe, practicing medicine, teaching when they found receptive students, quietly working to prepare humanity for a coming transformation. They were to remain unmarried, dedicating their lives entirely to the great work of human enlightenment. Before death, each brother would select and train a successor, ensuring an unbroken chain of transmission. They agreed to remain hidden for 100 years, after which time they would evaluate whether humanity had progressed sufficiently to receive their teachings more openly. The Fama Fraternitatis claimed that Christian Rosenkreuz lived to the remarkable age of 106, dying in 1484. His burial place was kept secret, known only to his immediate successors. The document relates that his tomb remained hidden until 1604, exactly 120 years after his death, when it was accidentally discovered during renovation work on the Brotherhood's meeting place. The discovery of this vault, with its elaborate symbolic decorations and mysterious contents, served as a signal that the time had come for the fraternity to begin revealing itself to the world. The description of Rosenkreuz's tomb reads like an initiatory text in itself. The vault was said to be 7-sided, with each wall bearing mysterious inscriptions and symbols. The ceiling depicted the heavens, while the floor showed the kingdoms of the earth. In the center stood an altar bearing the inscription, Jesus mihi omnia. Jesus is everything to me, beneath which lay the perfectly preserved body of the founder. Around him were arranged books of secret knowledge, mirrors of wonderful properties, bells, lamps that burned without fuel, and songs that played without musicians. Whether understood as historical fact or allegorical fiction, the story of Christian Rosenkreuz resonated deeply with the European imagination. The narrative addressed the spiritual crisis of an age caught between medieval faith and modern reason. It offered a third path that honored both a scientific investigation and mystical experience, suggesting that the apparent conflict between reason and revelation was false, that both were necessary aspects of a complete understanding of reality. The Fama was followed in 1615 by a second manifesto, the Confessio Fraternitatis, which elaborated upon the philosophical and theological foundations of the Rosicrucian worldview. This document made clearer the Protestant orientation of the Brotherhood, aligning itself with the Reformation while transcending sectarian divisions. It spoke of a coming general reformation of the whole world, not through violence or political revolution, but through the gradual illumination of human consciousness. The manifestos arrived at a moment when Europe was particularly receptive to their message. The 30 Years' War was brewing, threatening to tear the continent apart along religious lines. The scientific revolution was challenging ancient authorities, while new worlds discovered across the oceans expanded European horizons. Alchemy was transforming into chemistry, astrology into astronomy, and natural magic into natural philosophy. The Rosicrucian documents offered a framework that could encompass all these changes without abandoning spiritual meaning. The response to these publications was immediate and intense. Hundreds of pamphlets appeared across Europe, some supporting the Brotherhood, others attacking it, and many claiming to speak on its behalf. Scholars, nobles, and seekers of all kinds attempted to make contact with the mysterious fraternity, publishing open letters, asking for admission. Some claimed to have been initiated, while others denounced the whole affair as a hoax or a dangerous heresy. The Catholic Church condemned the movement, seeing it as a Protestant plot, while many Protestants suspected it of concealing Catholic sympathies. Among those fascinated by the Rosicrucian phenomena was a young Lutheran theologian named Johann Valentin Andrea, who would later be credited by many as the actual author of the manifestos. Whether he wrote them, inspired them, or merely sympathized with them remains uncertain. But his involvement highlights the complex relationship between the Rosicrucian impulse and the broader currents of Christian reform. Andrea would later distance himself from the movement, claiming it had been misunderstood and corrupted. Yet, he continued to advocate for the spiritual and social ideals the manifestos embodied. The ambiguity surrounding the historical existence of Christian Rosenkreuz and his fraternity has never been definitively resolved. No contemporary records from the 14th or 15th centuries mention Rosenkreuz or his travels. The linguistic style and content of the manifestos clearly marked them as products of the early 17th century rather than ancient documents. Yet the question of literal historical truth may be less important than the spiritual and cultural impact of the narrative. The Rose Cross emerged as a powerful symbol, synthesizing multiple streams of Western esotericism. The rose had long represented divine love, spiritual unfoldment, and the secrets of the heart, while the cross symbolized sacrifice, transformation, and the intersection of spirit and matter. Together, they suggested a path of development that united mystical experience with practical service, inner illumination with outer action. This symbol would prove remarkably adaptable, capable of bearing Christian, hermetic, alchemical, and eventually even secular humanistic interpretations. As the 17th century progressed, the initial excitement over the manifestos evolved into a more sustained cultural movement. While no central Rosicrucian organization emerged to validate or deny the various claims made in its name, the ideals and symbols of the Rose Cross spread throughout European intellectual and spiritual circles. The promise of the Rosicrucians that hidden wisdom existed which could heal both individual souls and society itself continued to inspire seekers long after the original furor had died down. The second manifesto emerged from the same mysterious sources in 1615, carrying with it a more urgent tone and clearer theological positioning. The Confessio Fraternitatis spoke directly to the hearts of those who had been stirred by the initial revelation, offering both clarification and deeper mystery. Where the Fama had told a story, the Confessio presented a philosophy, outlining a vision of cosmic harmony and human potential that would influence Western esoteric thought for centuries to come. This document positioned the Rosicrucian Brotherhood firmly within the Protestant Reformation, while transcending denominational boundaries. It spoke of the Pope as the Antichrist, aligning with Lutheran rhetoric. Yet its criticism extended beyond Rome to encompass all forms of spiritual tyranny and intellectual stagnation. The brothers declared themselves servants of a coming transformation that would sweep away not merely corrupt religious institutions, but the entire edifice of false knowledge that imprisoned human consciousness. The Confessio revealed that the fraternity possessed a complete philosophy of nature, one that reconciled apparent contradictions between biblical revelation and natural observation. They claimed to read the book of nature with the same clarity that theologians read scripture, finding in both the signature of the same divine author. This reading was not metaphorical, but practical, enabling them to understand the properties of plants and minerals, the influences of celestial bodies, and the hidden causes of disease. Their medicine worked not through opposition to nature, but through cooperation with its deepest principles. Yet even as these documents circulated and sparked intense speculation, a third text appeared that would prove even more enigmatic and influential. The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, published in 1616, abandoned the manifesto format entirely, presenting instead an elaborate allegorical narrative that has challenged interpreters ever since. This remarkable work, later acknowledged by Johann Valentin Andrea as his creation, describes 7 days of mystical experiences that may represent stages of spiritual initiation, alchemical processes, or both simultaneously. The Chemical Wedding begins with Christian Rosenkreuz, now an elderly man, receiving an invitation to a royal wedding delivered by a magnificent angel. The invitation is written in golden letters on blue paper, sealed with a sphinx, and demands immediate response. Despite his age and unworthiness, Rosenkreuz accepts, beginning a journey that will take him through trials, revelations, and transformations that operate on multiple levels of meaning simultaneously. Attained, he travels to a magnificent castle where numerous guests have assembled, each believing themselves worthy of attending the wedding. That night, all are weighed on a great scale of virtue, and most are found wanting, expelled in disgrace. Only a few, including Rosenkreuz, possess the necessary spiritual gravity to proceed. The weighing scene operates as social satire, attacking the pretensions of false mystics and charlatan alchemists, while also representing the necessary purification that precedes genuine initiation. The subsequent days involve increasingly profound mysteries. The wedding guests witness theatrical performances that encode hermetic teachings, participate in chemical operations that seem to involve the death and resurrection of the royal couple, and ultimately assist in the creation of new life through alchemical means. The narrative layers symbol upon symbol, mixing Christian imagery with pagan mythology, alchemical processes with psychological transformation, humor with profound philosophy. The Chemical Wedding demonstrated that Rosicrucian wisdom could be transmitted through art as effectively as through philosophical discourse. Its influence extended far beyond those specifically interested in Rosicrucianism, inspiring poets, dramatists, and artists who recognize in its symbolic method a means of expressing truths too subtle for a direct statement. The work suggested that the transformation of consciousness required not merely intellectual understanding, but imaginative participation in mythic patterns that engaged the whole being. The publication of these 3 foundational texts created a phenomenon unprecedented in European intellectual history. Never before had anonymous documents generated such widespread response, ranging from enthusiastic embrace to violent condemnation. The very anonymity of the manifestos became part of their power, allowing them to speak with an authority that transcended individual personality or institutional position. Tübingen, Paris, Prague, and London, scholars and seekers published responses to the Rosicrucian call. Some, like Michael Mayer, physician to Emperor Rudolph II, wrote elaborate defenses of the brotherhood, arguing that whether or not a formal organization existed, the ideals expressed in the manifestos deserved serious consideration. Mayer's works, particularly his Atalantifugians, with its remarkable synthesis of music, image, and text, demonstrated how Rosicrucian principles could inspire new forms of artistic and intellectual expression. Robert Fludd, the English physician and philosopher, became perhaps the most eloquent defender of Rosicrucian philosophy in the English-speaking world. His massive works attempted to demonstrate the mathematical and musical principles underlying creation, showing how the macrocosm and microcosm reflected each other in precise harmonic ratios. Though he never claimed membership in the fraternity, his writings did more than perhaps any others to establish Rosicrucian thought as a serious philosophical position worthy of academic consideration. Catholic response was swift and severe. The Jesuit order, recognizing in Rosicrucianism a threat to their own claims of possessing superior knowledge and spiritual authority, launched a campaign of denunciation. They portrayed the brotherhood as a diabolical conspiracy aimed at destroying Christian civilization, linking it with witchcraft, heresy, and political subversion. In some regions, merely possessing Rosicrucian texts became grounds for investigation by ecclesiastical authorities. Yet, persecution only added to the movement's mystique. The idea of an invisible college, a brotherhood of illuminated souls working secretly for human betterment, appealed powerfully to those who felt constrained by religious orthodoxy and social convention. The supposed invisibility of the Rosicrucians became a metaphor for a different kind of presence in the world, one that worked through influence rather than force, through inspiration rather than dogma. The concept of invisibility itself deserves careful consideration. The manifestos had declared that the brothers possessed the ability to move through the world unseen, which critics interpreted as a claim to literal invisibility through magical means. Supporters argued for a more sophisticated understanding, suggesting that the brothers remained invisible not through supernatural powers, but through their ability to blend into society, pursuing their work without revealing their affiliation. This invisibility was ethical and strategic rather than magical, allowing them to serve humanity without seeking personal glory or institutional power. In the Germanic states, where the manifestos originated, the response was particularly complex. The region was already fractured by religious conflict, with Catholic and Protestant princes vying for political and spiritual authority. The Rosicrucian documents, with their vision of a universal reformation that transcended sectarian divisions, offered hope to those exhausted by religious warfare. Yet, they also threatened those whose power depended on maintaining religious divisions. The Rosicrucian phenomenon coincided with and contributed to a broader transformation in European intellectual life. The same decades that saw the publication of the manifestos also witnessed Galileo's telescopic observations, Harvey's discovery of blood circulation, and Kepler's laws of planetary motion. The Rosicrucian vision of a unified science that encompassed both material and spiritual realities seemed to many to offer a framework for integrating these revolutionary discoveries. France became a particular center of Rosicrucian excitement when, in 1623, mysterious posters appeared on the walls of Paris announcing that the Brotherhood of the Rosecross had established itself in the city. The posters declared that the brothers could teach all sciences and lead seekers from error to truth, but that they remained invisible and could be contacted only by those whose intentions were pure. The appearance of these notices created a sensation, with the Parisian society divided between those who sought the brothers and those who mocked the entire affair as an elaborate hoax. The French philosopher René Descartes, then a young man traveling in Germany, later reported that he had attempted to contact the Rosicrucians but found no trace of their existence as an organized body. His eventual development of methodical doubt and mechanical philosophy can be seen partly as a response to the Rosicrucian challenge, an attempt to establish certain knowledge without recourse to secret traditions or mystical illumination. Yet, even Descartes retained elements of the Rosicrucian dream, particularly in his vision of a unified science that could improve the human condition. In England, the Rosicrucian impulse merged with existing traditions of natural philosophy and Christian Kabbalah as a circle around Samuel Hartlib, which included many of the founders of the Royal Society, embraced Rosicrucian ideals while adapting them to English circumstances. They spoke less of secret brotherhoods and more of public institutions dedicated to the advancement of learning. The invisible college became, in their hands, a metaphor for the Republic of Letters, a community of scholars united by shared commitment to truth rather than formal organization. The transformation of Rosicrucian ideals from mystical brotherhood to scientific society represents one of the most significant developments in the movement's early history. Francis Bacon's New Atlantis, published in 1627, described a utopian society governed by a college of natural philosophers whose practices closely resembled those attributed to the Rosicrucians, though Bacon never explicitly mentioned the Rose Cross. His vision of science as a collective enterprise aimed at relieving human suffering clearly drew from the same wells of inspiration. As the 17th century progressed, the initial furor over the manifestos gradually subsided, but the ideas they introduced had taken root. The absence of any central Rosicrucian authority meant that the tradition could develop in multiple directions simultaneously. Some emphasized the alchemical aspects, pursuing the creation of medicines and the transmutation of metals. Others focused on the mathematical and geometrical keys to nature's secrets. Still, others developed the mystical and meditative practices suggested by the symbolic narratives. This diversity of interpretation became a defining characteristic of Rosicrucian tradition. Without dogma or institutional authority to enforce orthodoxy, Rosicrucianism evolved as a living tradition, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining certain core symbols and ideals. The rose and cross remained central, but their meaning could shift depending on context. Sometimes emphasizing Christian mysticism, sometimes Hermetic philosophy, sometimes scientific investigation. The underground nature of early Rosicrucian development created a tradition of transmission through symbols, allegories, and indirect communication that would profoundly influence Western esotericism, rather than establishing churches or schools in the conventional sense. Rosicrucian influence spread through networks of correspondence, through books with multiple layers of meaning, through symbols embedded in architecture and art. This method of transmission protected the tradition from persecution while ensuring that only those capable of understanding would receive its deeper teachings. The roots of Rosicrucian philosophy extend deep into the soil of antiquity, drawing nourishment from traditions that flowered along the Nile thousands of years before Christian Rosenkreuz was said to have walked the earth. To understand the Rose Cross, one must journey backward through time to the temples of ancient Egypt, where priest initiates first articulated the principles that would later emerge in Rosicrucian teaching. These Egyptian mysteries, preserved through various channels and transformed by successive cultures, provided the foundational wisdom upon which the entire edifice of Western esotericism would be constructed. In the sacred precincts of Memphis and Thebes, initiates learned that the visible world was but a reflection of invisible realities, that the human being was a microcosm perfectly mirroring the macrocosm of the universe. They discovered that death was not an ending, but a transformation, that consciousness could transcend physical limitations through proper training and purification. These teachings were encoded in hieroglyphic texts, embodied in architectural proportions, and transmitted through ritual dramas that enacted the death and resurrection of Osiris, prefiguring by millennia the Christian mystery of death and rebirth. The Egyptian conception of the human being as a complex entity composed of multiple bodies or vehicles of consciousness would become central to Rosicrucian anthropology. The physical body was merely the densest of several interpenetrating forms, including the Ka or etheric double, the Ba or soul, and the Ak or immortal spirit. This understanding suggested that human development involved not merely moral improvement or intellectual advancement, but the conscious cultivation of subtle bodies that could operate in dimensions beyond the physical. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, he initiated a fusion of Egyptian and Greek thought that would prove crucial for the later development of Rosicrucianism. The city of Alexandria became a crucible where ancient wisdom traditions encountered Greek philosophy, producing a remarkable synthesis. The great library of Alexandria housed texts from every known tradition, and scholars could study Egyptian mysteries alongside Platonic dialogues, Pythagorean mathematics, and Chaldean astrology. It was in this Alexandrian milieu that Hermeticism proper emerged, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes, a figure who combined aspects of the Egyptian god Thoth with the Greek Hermes. The Hermetic texts, particularly the Corpus Hermeticum, articulated a philosophy that would become fundamental to Rosicrucian thought. The famous Emerald Tablet, with its declaration that as above, so below, provided the key principles suggesting that the same laws governed all levels of existence, from the movement of planets to the growth of plants to the development of human consciousness. The Hermetic texts spoke of humanity's divine origin and potential, teaching that human beings had fallen from a state of spiritual awareness into material imprisonment but retained the capacity to remember and reclaim their divine nature. This was not achieved through faith alone, but through gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of spiritual realities. The path to this knowledge involved both theoretical study and practical techniques of meditation, visualization, and ritual that could awaken dormant faculties of perception. Parallel to the Hermetic tradition, Neoplatonism developed as a sophisticated philosophical system that would profoundly influence Rosicrucian metaphysics. Aquinas, teaching in 3rd century Alexandria, described reality as an emanation from the One. It's the absolute unity that transcended all categories of being and non-being. From this one proceeded the divine mind, or nous, containing all archetypal forms, and from the nous emanated the world soul, which animated and organized the material cosmos. This Neoplatonic cosmology provided Rosicrucians with a philosophical framework for understanding the relationship between spirit and matter, explaining how the divine could be present in the world without being limited by it. The concept of emanation suggested that creation was not a single act in the past, but an ongoing process with divine energy constantly flowing through hierarchical levels of being. Human souls, according to this view, could ascend through these levels through philosophical contemplation and spiritual practice, ultimately achieving union with the One. The Neoplatonic tradition also contributed the concept of the great chain of being, a hierarchical structure linking the highest spiritual realities to the densest material forms through a continuous series of gradations. Every entity occupied a specific position in this chain, from minerals to plants and animals to humans, and from humans through various orders of angels to God. This concept would become central to Rosicrucian understanding of humanity's place in the cosmos and the possibility of spiritual evolution. As the Roman Empire crumbled and Europe entered what would later be called the Dark Ages, much ancient wisdom was preserved in the Islamic world. Muslim scholars translated Greek, philosophical, and Egyptian magical texts into Arabic, adding their own insights and discoveries. The Islamic tradition of alchemy, building upon earlier Egyptian and Greek foundations, developed sophisticated theories of matter and transformation that would later flow back into Europe through Spain and Sicily. Islamic alchemists like Jabir, Ibn Hayyun, and Arazi did more than pursue the transmutation of base metals into gold. They developed a comprehensive philosophy of nature that saw all material substances as different arrangements of fundamental qualities, capable of transformation through the proper application of heat, cold, moisture, and dryness. Their laboratory work was accompanied by spiritual practices, for they understood that the alchemists must be transformed along with the materials in their vessels. The Islamic concept of the perfect human, Linton Alchemil, resonated deeply with what would become Rosicrucian anthropology. This idea, developed by Sufi mystics like Ibn Arabi, portrayed the human being as a unique creation, capable of manifesting all divine attributes, serving as a conscious link between the creator and creation. The perfect human was not merely a moral exemplar, but a cosmic function, a necessary mediator through whom divine consciousness could know itself in manifestation. The transmission of Islamic learning to Christian Europe accelerated during the 12th and 13th centuries, particularly through the translation schools of Toledo and Sicily. Christian scholars, hungry for the lost wisdom of antiquity, discovered in Arabic texts not only the works of Aristotle and Plato, but also Hermetic, alchemical, and magical traditions that had been preserved and developed in the Islamic world. This influx of knowledge created an intellectual revolution that would prepare the ground for the later emergence of Rosicrucianism. Among the most significant traditions to enter European consciousness during this period was Kabbalah. It's a Jewish mystical tradition that had developed in parallel with Islamic and Christian esotericism. The Kabbalah offered a sophisticated system of biblical interpretation that revealed hidden meanings beneath the literal text, as well as a complex cosmology centered on the Tree of Life with its 10 Sephirot, or divine emanations. Christian scholars, particularly those associated with the Renaissance academies of Florence and elsewhere, recognized in Kabbalah a bridge between biblical revelation and Platonic philosophy. Platonic philosophy. They developed what came to be known as Christian Kabbalah, arguing that Kabbalistic interpretation could reveal Christian truths hidden in the Hebrew scriptures. The idea that divine wisdom had been transmitted through a secret tradition from Moses, parallel to but hidden within the public religious tradition, aligned perfectly with Rosicrucian concepts of concealed knowledge. The Kabbalistic tree of life provided Rosicrucians with a precise map of consciousness and cosmos, showing how divine energy descended through specific channels from the ultimate source to material manifestation. Each sephira represented not only a divine attribute, but also a state of consciousness, a level of reality, and a stage in the creative process. The paths connecting the sephirot corresponded to specific practices and experiences, through which consciousness could ascend from material awareness to divine union. The integration of Kabbalah with Christian mysticism produced a uniquely powerful synthesis. Medieval Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart had already developed sophisticated understandings of the soul's journey to God, speaking of the divine spark within human nature and the possibility of mystical union. When combined with Kabbalistic cosmology and Hermetic philosophy, Christian mysticism gained a more detailed framework for understanding spiritual development. The concept of the divine spark, the scintilla animi of the Christian mystics, or the neshama of the Kabbalists, became central to Rosicrucian psychology. This was understood not as a metaphor, but as a literal fragment of divine consciousness residing within each human being, covered over by layers of ignorance and attachment, but capable of being awakened and cultivated. The entire purpose of Rosicrucian practice could be understood as the care and development of this divine seed until it flowered to full spiritual consciousness. Ramon Lull, the 13th century Majorcan philosopher, contributed another crucial element to what would become Rosicrucian thought through his Ars Magna, a system that attempted to reduce all knowledge to combinations of fundamental principles. His influence can be seen in the Rosicrucian aspiration to develop a universal language or method that could express and manipulate all forms of truth. This was not merely an intellectual exercise, but a spiritual practice, based on the belief that reality itself was structured according to divine patterns that could be discovered and utilized. The Renaissance magus Marsilio Ficino, translating the Corpus Hermeticum for Cosimo de' Medici in 1463, believed he was recovering wisdom that predated and validated Christianity. His translation work, along with that of his student Pico della Mirandola, Tonic, made Hermetic and Neoplatonic texts widely available to European intellectuals for the first time in centuries. Ficino's concept of natural magic, working with the hidden sympathies linking all parts of the cosmos, would become fundamental to Rosicrucian practice. Pico della Mirandola's famous oration on the dignity of man articulated a vision of human potential that perfectly expressed what would become the Rosicrucian ideal. Humans alone among creatures had no fixed nature, but could choose to descend to the level of beasts or ascend to divine union. This freedom was both a tremendous responsibility and a glorious opportunity, making each human life a cosmic drama with ultimate consequences. The confluence of all these streams of wisdom created a rich reservoir from which Rosicrucian philosophy would draw. Egyptian mysteries provided the initiatory framework and the understanding of subtle bodies. Hermeticism contributed the principle of correspondence and the goal of gnosis. Neoplatonism offered a sophisticated metaphysics of emanation and return. Islamic alchemy brought practical methods of transformation and the ideal of the perfect human. Kabbalah provided detailed maps of consciousness and techniques of spiritual ascent. Christian mysticism contributed the centrality of love and the promise of divine union. Yet, Rosicrucianism was more than simply an eclectic combination of existing traditions. It represented a new synthesis adapted to the specific conditions of early modern Europe. It attempted to reconcile ancient wisdom with new scientific discoveries, to bridge the growing gap between faith and reason, to maintain spiritual meaning in an increasingly materialistic age. The Rosicrucian adepts understood themselves as inheritors of a primordial tradition, a theca, theologia, or ancient theology that had been revealed at the beginning of human history and preserved through various channels despite the forces of ignorance and suppression. At the heart of Rosicrucian wisdom lies the profound marriage of two symbols that together code an entire philosophy of transformation: the rose and the cross, simple images that might appear decorative to the uninitiated eye, contain within their forms the complete doctrine of spiritual evolution that defines the Rosicrucian path. To understand these symbols in their full depth is to grasp not merely intellectual concepts, but living forces that operate within both the human soul and the cosmos at large. The cross, in its most fundamental aspect, represents the intersection of spirit and matter, the vertical beam descending from heaven, meeting the horizontal beam of earthly existence. This meeting point, the crucial center where the arms intersect, marks the human heart, the sacred space where divine consciousness encounters material experience. Every human being lives at this crossroads, pulled between spiritual aspiration and material necessity, between the eternal and the temporal, between unity and multiplicity. Cross carries meanings that extend far beyond its Christian associations. In its equal-armed form, it represents the four elements of ancient philosophy that must be balanced within the aspirant. Fire rises upward with its spiritual ardor and transformative power. Water descends with its emotional depth and receptive qualities. Air moves horizontally with its intellectual clarity and communicative force. Earth provides the stable foundation, the material basis upon which all transformation depends. The initiate learns to stand at the center of these forces, maintaining equilibrium while allowing each its proper expression. The cross also embodies the fundamental principle of sacrifice, not in the sense of loss, but of sacred making, the conscious transformation of lower nature into higher purpose. Every moment of genuine spiritual development requires this sacrifice, the willingness to release attachment to familiar forms in order to receive new life. Akala, the vertical beam, represents this aspiring will, constantly dying to the horizontal pull of habit and unconscious existence, constantly being reborn into greater awareness. Upon this cross blooms the rose, and here the symbolism becomes even more intricate and beautiful. The rose has served as a symbol of perfection, completion, and divine love across numerous cultures. But in the Rosicrucian context, it specifically represents the flowering of consciousness that occurs when the opposing forces represented by the cross are brought into harmony. The rose does not replace the cross, but grows from it, showing that suffering and limitation, when properly understood and transformed, become the very soil from which beauty and wisdom emerge. The unfolding petals of the rose suggest the gradual opening of spiritual perception, each petal representing a faculty of the soul, awakening to its true function. The outer petals might represent the purified senses, capable of perceiving the spiritual forces behind material appearances. The middle petals could symbolize the awakened imagination, memory, and thought, transformed from servants of the ego into instruments of higher consciousness. Rounding the golden center represent the highest spiritual faculties of intuition, inspiration, and true will. The color of the rose carries its own significance within Rosicrucian symbolism. The red rose represents divine love manifesting through human experience, the blood of sacrifice transformed into the wine of communion. The white rose symbolizes purity of intention and the virginal soul, prepared to receive divine impregnation. The golden rose, rarest and most precious, represents the full realization of spiritual consciousness, the completion of the great work. Some Rosicrucian traditions speak of a rose that changes color as the initiate progresses, beginning white, becoming red through the trials of transformation, and ultimately achieving the golden radiance of enlightenment. This symbolism finds its most elaborate expression in the practice of spiritual alchemy. Rosicrucians understood not primarily as a physical process, but as the transformation of consciousness itself. While some adepts certainly worked with material substances in their laboratories, they understood these operations as external representations of internal processes. The metals and minerals in their vessels corresponded to states of consciousness. In the chemical reactions, they observed mirrored transformations occurring within their own being. The alchemical process, as understood by Rosicrucian practitioners, unfolds through 7 distinct stages, each associated with a planet, a metal, and a specific aspect of spiritual development. These stages do not necessarily occur in linear sequence, but often overlap, recur, and spiral through expanding cycles of development. Understanding these stages provides insight into the systematic nature of Rosicrucian spiritual practice. The first stage, calcination, associated with Saturn and lead, involves the breaking down of the ego's rigid structures through the fire of suffering or spiritual discipline. The false personality, constructed from social conditioning and unconscious identification, must be reduced to ash before true transformation can begin. This is not a violent destruction, but a careful heating that separates the essential from the accidental, the eternal from the temporal. The aspirant learns to observe their own thoughts, emotions, and reactions without identification, watching the ego's patterns dissolve under the light of consciousness. Dissolution, the second stage, ruled by Jupiter in 10, takes the ash of calcination and dissolves it in the waters of the unconscious. Here, the aspirant encounters the chaotic prima materia of their own psyche, the undifferentiated potential that exists before conscious organization. Dreams become vivid and meaningful, synchronicities multiply, and the boundaries between self and world become fluid. This stage requires courage, as the familiar structures of identity have been removed and new ones have not yet formed. Separation, governed by Mars and iron, involves the discrimination and sorting of the products of dissolution. The aspirant learns to distinguish between personal projections and objective realities, between genuine spiritual impulses and wish fulfillment fantasies. This martial stage requires the sword of discrimination, cutting through illusions and attachments with sometimes painful precision. What emerges is a clearer understanding of one's true nature, separated from the accumulated dross of false identity. Conjunction, the fourth stage associated with Venus and copper, represents the sacred marriage of opposites within the psyche. The masculine and feminine principles, the active and receptive, the rational and intuitive, are brought together in a union that transcends their apparent opposition. This is not a mere mixing, but a true chemical wedding, producing a third thing that partakes of both natures while transcending them. The heart opens to a love that encompasses both self and other, earth and heaven, matter and spirit. Fermentation, ruled by mercury and quicksilver, introduces a spiritual enzyme that accelerates the transformation process. Often, this comes as an influx of inspiration from higher dimensions of consciousness, a visitation of what the alchemists called the peacock's tail with its iridescent colors. The aspirant may experience visions, receive teachings in dreams, or suddenly understand mysteries that had long remained opaque. This mercurial stage brings the volatile spirit that will allow the final transformations to occur. Distillation, the sixth stage, governed by the moon and silver, involves the repeated cycling of consciousness between states of expansion and contraction, evaporation and condensation. Through this process, consciousness becomes increasingly refined, capable of operating at higher frequencies while maintaining grounding in practical reality. The lunar influence brings deep intuition and psychic sensitivity, but also the discipline to channel these gifts constructively. The seventh and final stage, coagulation, ruled by the sun and gold, represents the crystallization of the philosopher's stone within the aspirant's being. This is not an ending, but a new beginning, for the stone is not a static achievement, but a living capacity for continuous transformation. The consciousness that has passed through these stages has become a transmuting agent, capable of facilitating transformation in others through presence alone. The philosopher's stone itself, that legendary goal of alchemical pursuit, was understood by true Rosicrucian adepts not as a physical substance, but as a state of consciousness that had achieved perfect balance and integration. This consciousness could indeed produce remarkable effects in the physical world, including healing and the acceleration of natural processes. But these were secondary to its primary function as an instrument of spiritual service. Sacred geometry provided another language through which Rosicrucians encoded and transmitted their understanding of transformation. The geometric forms found in nature, from the spiral of shells to the hexagonal structure of crystals, were seen as expressions of divine principles that could be consciously employed in spiritual development. The pentagram, with its 5 points representing the 4 elements plus spirit, served as a powerful symbol of human wholeness in the dominion of consciousness over material forces. The golden ratio, the mysterious proportion found throughout nature, from the arrangement of flower petals to the spiral of galaxies, held special significance for Rosicrucian thought. This mathematical relationship, where each part relates to the whole in the same proportion that the whole relates to its greater part, was seen as a signature of divine beauty and harmony. Architecture based on these proportions, whether in temples or in a structure of ritual, could facilitate the harmonious development of consciousness. The vesicopieces, formed by 2 intersecting circles, represented the interpenetration of different dimensions of reality and served as a gateway symbol in Rosicrucian meditation. The hexagram, combining upward and downward pointing triangles, showed the perfect balance of ascending and descending forces. The octagon mediated between the square of material manifestation and the circle of spiritual perfection. Each form carried specific energetic qualities that could be activated through contemplation and proper use. Rosicrucian adepts understood that these geometric principles operated not only in external forms, but within the subtle anatomy of the human being. The chakras, or energy centers, though more explicitly developed in Eastern traditions, were known to European esotericists and incorporated into Rosicrucian practice. The proper alignment and activation of these centers, according to geometric principles, could accelerate spiritual development and awaken latent faculties. Contexture itself became a means of encoding and transmitting Rosicrucian wisdom. The great cathedrals of Europe, many built by master masons who possessed this esoteric knowledge, incorporated sacred proportions and symbolic programs that could initiate the prepared observer into hidden mysteries. The placement of windows to capture light at specific times, the acoustic properties that could induce altered states of consciousness, the labyrinthine patterns that guided ritual movement, all served to create spaces where transformation could occur. The rose windows of Gothic cathedrals represented perhaps the most perfect architectural expression of Rosicrucian symbolism, combining the rose motif with geometric precision and the play of colored light. As sunlight passed through these windows, it was transformed into a rainbow of colors that painted the interior space with constantly changing patterns of illumination, a living metaphor for the transformation of divine light into the multiplicity of manifest existence and its potential return to unity. The dawn of what historians would later call the Age of Enlightenment found Rosicrucian ideas permeating the intellectual atmosphere of Europe like an invisible perfume, influencing the development of modern science, even as that science seemed to challenge mystical worldviews. The apparent conflict between rational investigation and spiritual illumination that characterizes modern perception did not exist for many of the period's greatest minds, who saw in Rosicrucian philosophy a framework that could unite empirical observation with a transcendent meaning. The scientific revolution that transformed European understanding of the natural world drew heavily from the wells of Hermetic and Rosicrucian thought, though this influence would later be obscured by historians eager to present science as a triumph of reason over superstition. Isaac Newton, whose Principia Mathematica became the foundation of classical physics, spent more time studying alchemy and biblical prophecy than mathematics, filling thousands of pages with notes on the philosopher's stone and the architecture of Solomon's temple. His vision of universal gravitation as an invisible force acting at a distance would have been incomprehensible without the Hermetic concept of occult sympathies linking all parts of the cosmos. Robert Boyle, often called the father of modern chemistry, was deeply involved in what he called the Invisible College, a network of natural philosophers who met to discuss experimental findings and their philosophical implications. This Invisible College, whether or not it had any direct connection to the Rosicrucian fraternity, operated according to remarkably similar principles. Its members sought to uncover the hidden laws of nature through experimental investigation, while maintaining that such knowledge should serve the betterment of humanity rather than personal gain. The influence of Francis Bacon on this emerging scientific culture cannot be overstated, and Bacon himself showed clear signs of Rosicrucian influence. His unfinished utopian work, The New Atlantis, published posthumously in 1627, described an ideal society governed by a scientific priesthood called Solomon's House, or the College of the 6 Days' Work. These philosopher-scientists pursued knowledge of natural causes and the enlargement of human empire over nature. But their investigations included areas that modern science would consider occult, such as the prolongation of life, the transmutation of materials, and communication across vast distances. Bacon's vision aligned remarkably with Rosicrucian ideals in its emphasis on collective rather than individual achievement, its dedication to human welfare, and its understanding of knowledge as sacred trust requiring moral purification in its practitioners. The Baconian method of empirical investigation, far from representing a rejection of spiritual concerns, emerged from a deeply religious conviction that God had written 2 books, Scripture and Nature, both of which could reveal divine truth when properly interpreted. In the German states, where the Rosicrucian movement had originated, the tradition evolved through a complex interaction with Lutheran pietism and emerging Masonic organizations. The Gold and Rosenkreuz order, which appeared in the mid-18th century, claimed direct descent from the original brotherhood and developed an elaborate system of degrees and initiations. This order attracted members from the highest levels of German society, including princes, scholars, and even allegedly King Frederick William II of Prussia. The German Rosicrucian lodges developed sophisticated theoretical frameworks that attempted to reconcile Christian theology with Hermetic philosophy and emerging scientific knowledge. They taught that nature operated according to divine laws that could be discovered through a combination of experimentation, mathematical analysis, and spiritual illumination. Their laboratories served simultaneously as spaces for chemical experimentation and spiritual meditation, with the understanding that the investigators' state of consciousness affected the results of their experiments. Hans Baptist van Helmont, the Flemish physician and alchemist, exemplified this integration of scientific and spiritual investigation. His discovery of gases as distinct from air revolutionized chemistry, yet he attributed his insights to divine illumination received during mystical experiences. Van Helmont's concept of the archeus, a spiritual organizing principle within living organisms, influenced medical theory for generations while pointing toward later vitalist philosophies that would attempt to bridge mechanism and spiritualism. The relationship between Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry during this period remains one of the most debated topics in esoteric history. While the Masonic order's official origins trace to medieval stonemason guilds, the speculative Freemasonry that emerged in the early 18th century incorporated numerous Rosicrucian elements. The 18th degree of the Scottish Rite, known as the Knight Rose Croix, explicitly invoked Rosicrucian symbolism and philosophy, though whether this represented historical continuity or retrospective adoption remains unclear. What is certain is that both movements shared fundamental concerns and methods. Both emphasized moral and spiritual development through initiatory degrees. Both employed architectural and geometric symbolism, and both proclaimed goals of universal brotherhood and the advancement of human knowledge. The spread of Freemasonry throughout Europe and beyond provided channels through which Rosicrucian ideas could flow. Even when the specific identity of Rosicrucianism was obscured or forgotten. In France, the Rosicrucian impulse manifested through various mystical and illuminous societies that flourished in the decades before the Revolution. The Elias Cohens of Martinez de Pascalis taught a complex system of ceremonial magic aimed at reintegrating fallen humanity with its divine source. Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, Pascalis' student who became known as the unknown philosopher, developed a more interior path that emphasized personal transformation through meditation and moral purification rather than ritual practice. The French Illuminists maintained that humanity had fallen from a wise state of direct communion with divine wisdom, but retained the capacity to restore this connection through proper spiritual practice. They developed elaborate cosmologies, describing the emanation of reality from divine source and the corresponding path of return available to the prepared soul. Their influence extended far beyond explicitly esoteric circles, shaping the Romantic movement and contributing to the idealistic philosophies that would dominate 19th century thought. Comte de Saint-Germain, one of history's most enigmatic figures, appeared at various European courts during the 18th century, claiming to possess the secret of immortality and demonstrating apparent knowledge of past events as if he had witnessed them personally. Whether charlatan or adept, his activities kept Rosicrucian ideas in circulation among the European aristocracy. He spoke of a coming age of enlightenment when secret wisdom would become public knowledge, when science and spirituality would reunite, and when humanity would reclaim its divine inheritance. Across the Atlantic, Rosicrucian ideas found fertile soil in the American colonies, where religious freedom and frontier conditions created unique opportunities for esoteric experimentation. The Ephrata cloister in Pennsylvania, established by Conrad Purcell in 1732, combined German pietist spirituality with Rosicrucian symbolism and practice. This community, which flourished for nearly a century, demonstrated that Rosicrucian ideals could be lived communally, with members dedicating themselves to spiritual development, artistic creation, and service to humanity. The influence of Rosicrucian thought on the American founding fathers remains a subject of considerable speculation and debate. Benjamin Franklin's involvement with Freemasonry is well documented, and his scientific investigations into electricity and other natural phenomena reflected the Rosicrucian ideal of uncovering nature's secrets for human benefit. Thomas Jefferson's design for the University of Virginia incorporated geometric principles and proportions that suggested familiarity with sacred architecture, while his vision of religious freedom aligned with Rosicrucian ideals of spiritual tolerance. The Great Seal of the United States, with its unfinished pyramid topped by an all-seeing eye, has been interpreted as containing Rosicrucian symbolism, though historians debate whether this was intentional or coincidental. The motto Novus Ordo Seclorum, announcing a new order of the ages, certainly resonated with Rosicrucian prophecies of coming transformation. Whether or not the founders consciously drew from Rosicrucian sources, they created a political experiment that embodied many Rosicrucian ideals, including religious tolerance, dedication to human progress, and faith in the power of knowledge to improve the human condition. The Swedish mystic Emanuel Swedenborg, though not explicitly connected to Rosicrucian organizations, developed a spiritual philosophy that paralleled many Rosicrucian teachings. His doctrine of correspondences, describing how every natural phenomenon reflected a spiritual reality, provided a sophisticated framework for understanding the relationship between visible and invisible worlds. Swedenborg's detailed descriptions of spiritual realms, based on what he claimed were direct experiences during altered states of consciousness, influenced generations of esotericists and contributed to the development of spiritualism in the following century. The period also witnessed the emergence of what might be called scientific Rosicrucianism, simplified by figures like Michael Mayer, who attempted to demonstrate Rosicrucian principles through experimental investigation. Mayer's Atalanta Fugians combined visual emblems, musical fugues, and alchemical descriptions in a multimedia presentation that anticipated later attempts to synthesize art and science. His works suggested that the secrets of nature could be approached through multiple sensory and cognitive channels simultaneously, each revealing aspects hidden from the others. As the Enlightenment progressed, the tension between mechanical and spiritual worldviews became increasingly pronounced. The success of Newtonian physics in predicting celestial motions and explaining terrestrial phenomena seemed to support a clockwork universe operating according to blind mechanical laws. Yet many of the period's greatest thinkers, including Newton himself, claimed that mechanism could not explain consciousness, life, or the apparent design in nature. Rosicrucian philosophy offered a middle path, accepting mechanical causation in the physical realm while maintaining that higher laws operated in spiritual dimensions. The Romantic reaction against pure rationalism that emerged in the late 18th century drew heavily from Rosicrucian sources, though often without acknowledgement. The Romantic emphasis on imagination as a faculty of perception rather than mere fantasy, the belief in nature as a living book of symbols, and the conviction that poetry and art could convey truths inaccessible to rational analysis, all reflected Rosicrucian influence. William Blake, though idiosyncratic in his mythology, expressed essentially Rosicrucian ideas when he wrote of seeing eternity in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower. The period's fascination with electricity and magnetism as invisible forces that could produce visible effects provided new metaphors for understanding spiritual influences. Franz Anton Mesmer's theory of animal magnetism, while eventually discredited as physical science, pointed toward the reality of subtle energies that could be transmitted between individuals and used for healing. The Mesmerist movement that spread throughout Europe and America kept alive the Rosicrucian concept of invisible forces that could be consciously directed through trained will and imagination. The 19th century witnessed an extraordinary resurrection of Rosicrucian thought, merging from the shadows of Enlightenment rationalism to capture the imagination of a generation hungry for spiritual meaning in an increasingly industrialized world. This revival did not simply repeat earlier forms, but transformed them, creating new syntheses that would define Western esotericism for generations to come. The Victorian era, with its peculiar combination of scientific progress and spiritual yearning, proved the perfect crucible for this alchemical transformation of ancient wisdom into modern forms. The Industrial Revolution had transformed not only the physical landscape of Europe and America, but the psychological landscape of their inhabitants. The movement from rural to urban life, the replacement of traditional crafts with factory production, and the erosion of established religious certainties created a spiritual vacuum that mechanical progress could not fill. Into this vacuum flowed a renewed interest in mysticism, occultism, and ancient wisdom traditions, with Rosicrucianism providing a particularly attractive framework for those seeking to reconcile spiritual aspiration with scientific thinking. In England, the formation of the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia in 1867 marked a crucial turning point in the modern history of Rosicrucianism. Founded by Robert Wentworth Little and restricted to master masons, this society attempted to study and preserve Rosicrucian knowledge within a scholarly framework. Unlike earlier Rosicrucian manifestations that had often remained deliberately obscure, the SRIA operated with formal membership roles, regular meetings, and published proceedings, bringing Rosicrucian studies into a quasi-academic context. The members of the SRIA included some of the most prominent Freemasons and scholars of their day, men who moved comfortably between conventional respectability and esoteric investigation. William Wynne Westcott, who would later co-found the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, served as Supreme Magus of the SRIA and used his position to research and disseminate historical materials related to Rosicrucianism. These Victorian occultists approached the tradition with a peculiar combination of romantic imagination and scholarly rigor, attempting to document historical connections while simultaneously creating new mythologies. The scholarship of this period while often unreliable by modern academic standards, performed the crucial function of gathering scattered threads of Western esoteric tradition into coherent narratives. Kenneth Mackenzie's Royal Masonic Cyclopedia, published in 1877, provided detailed entries on Rosicrucian history and symbolism that would influence subsequent generations of students. These works created a canon of Rosicrucian literature and established interpretive frameworks that continue to shape the understanding of the tradition. Perhaps no organization more fully embodied the 19th century Rosicrucian revival than the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Founded in 1888 by William Wynne Westcott, Samuel Little McGregor Mathers, and William Robert Woodman. While not explicitly a Rosicrucian order, the Golden Dawn synthesized Rosicrucian symbolism with Kabbalah, Egyptian mysteries, Enochian magic, and other esoteric streams into a comprehensive system of spiritual development that would profoundly influence 20th century occultism. The Golden Dawn's genius lay in its systematic approach to esoteric education, creating a graded curriculum that led students from basic concepts through increasingly complex theoretical and practical studies. Key, the order's degree structure, based on the Kabbalistic tree of life, provided a map of consciousness that members could use to navigate their spiritual development. Each grade included specific studies, meditations, and rituals designed to awaken particular faculties and integrate specific aspects of the psyche. The Rose Cross itself became central to Golden Dawn symbolism, particularly in the Adeptus Minor degree, where candidates underwent a ritual death and resurrection explicitly linked to Christian Rosenkreuz. The order's Rose Cross Lamen, a complex symbol combining Hebrew letters, alchemical symbols, and the Rosencross motif, became one of the most recognizable images in Western esotericism. Symbol was understood not merely as a badge of membership, but as a meditation device encoding the entire philosophy of the order. Among the Golden Dawn's members were some of the most creative and influential figures of the era. William Butler Yeats found in the order's symbolism a rich source of poetic imagery and a framework for understanding the relationship between art and spiritual reality. Aleister Crowley, though he would later break with the Golden Dawn to found his own system, carried forward many of his teachings in modified form. Florence Farr, actress and feminist, demonstrated that esoteric practice was not exclusively male domain, pioneering the equal participation of women in Western magical traditions. The Golden Dawn's influence extended far beyond its relatively small membership through the writings and teachings of its initiates. Israel Regardie's publication of the order's rituals and teachings in the 1930s made available to the general public a complete system of Western esoteric practice that had previously been restricted to initiates. Its democratization of occult knowledge, while controversial among traditionalists, aligned with the original Rosicrucian ideal of making wisdom available to all prepared souls. Parallel to the Golden Dawn's ritual magic approach, their expressions of Rosicrucian philosophy emphasized healing and Christian mysticism. The Rosicrucian Fellowship, founded by Max Hendel in 1909, presented Rosicrucian teachings through a lens of esoteric Christianity and astrological science. Hendel, who claimed to have been initiated by a group of elder brothers in Europe, developed a comprehensive cosmology that attempted to reconcile biblical accounts with evolutionary theory and astronomical discoveries. Hendel's Rosicrucian Cosmoconception, published in 1909, offered detailed descriptions of human evolution through cosmic periods, the development of consciousness through reincarnation, and the role of Christ as the solar logos incarnating to assist human spiritual development. His system emphasized the development of spiritual sight through specific exercises in moral purification, promising students the ability to investigate spiritual realms directly rather than accepting teachings on faith alone. The Rosicrucian Fellowship established a headquarters in Oceanside, California, complete with a healing temple designed according to sacred geometric principles. This physical center represented a new development in Rosicrucian history. It's creating a visible institution while maintaining that the true Rosicrucian brotherhood remained invisible and could be contacted only on spiritual planes. The fellowship's emphasis on vegetarianism, astrology, and spiritual healing attracted thousands of students worldwide, particularly those seeking an alternative to conventional Christianity that retained Christian symbolism and values. Harvey Spencer Lewis, founding the ancient mystical order Rosicrucians in 1915, took a different approach, claiming to have received authorization from European Rosicrucians to establish the order in America. AMORC, as it became known, developed into one of the largest and most successful Rosicrucian organizations, combining correspondence courses with lodge activities and eventually establishing Rosicrucian Park in San Jose, California, complete with Egyptian and Babylonian museums, a planetarium, and research facilities. Lewis possessed a remarkable talent for organization and promotion, using modern advertising methods and eventually radio broadcasts to spread Rosicrucian teachings to a mass audience. AMORC's correspondence courses, sent to students worldwide, provided systematic instruction in concentration, visualization, psychic development, and healing techniques. The order claimed to preserve authentic Rosicrucian traditions while adapting them to modern conditions, offering a path of development that could be pursued without abandoning conventional life. The proliferation of Rosicrucian organizations during this period led to inevitable conflicts over authenticity and authority. Various groups claimed to be the only legitimate representatives of the original brotherhood, producing elaborate historical documents and initiation certificates to support their claims. These disputes, while often acrimonious, had the positive effect of generating extensive research into Rosicrucian history and forcing organizations to articulate their philosophies more clearly. The 19th century Rosicrucian revival coincided with and contributed to broader cultural movements, including spiritualism, theosophy, and New Thought. The spiritualist movement, with its emphasis on communication with the dead and demonstration of soul survival, shared with Rosicrucianism a conviction that invisible realms could be investigated through proper techniques. Many Rosicrucians participated in seances and psychical research, seeing these as scientific investigations of spiritual realities. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky's Theosophical Society, founded in 1875, while drawing primarily from Eastern sources, incorporated significant Rosicrucian elements into its synthesis. Blavatsky's secret doctrine referenced Rosicrucian teachings and presented Christian Rosenkreuz as one of the advanced souls guiding human evolution. The theosophical emphasis on the evolution of consciousness through multiple incarnations aligned with Rosicrucian concepts of spiritual development. Though expressed through different symbolic systems, the New Thought movement, emerging in the late 19th century, translated certain Rosicrucian principles into practical techniques for health and success. The idea that thought could influence physical reality, central to New Thought philosophy, derived partly from Rosicrucian teachings about the creative power of imagination and will. Writers like William Walker Atkinson, who wrote under various pseudonyms, including Yogi Ramakaraka, popularized exercises in concentration and visualization that drew from Rosicrucian sources while presenting them in modernized forms. The Victorian fascination with ancient Egypt, sparked by archaeological discoveries and imperial adventures, provided new symbolic resources for Rosicrucian organizations. The image of Christian Rosenkreuz studying in Egypt gained new relevance as hieroglyphics were deciphered and tombs excavated. Many Rosicrucian groups incorporated Egyptian motifs into their symbolism and rituals, presenting their teachings as continuations of mysteries practiced in ancient temples along the Nile. This Egyptian connection was more than decorative, reflecting a genuine belief that Rosicrucian wisdom descended from pre-Christian sources that Christianity had absorbed rather than replaced. The Hermetic texts, increasingly available in translation, are understood as Egyptian wisdom preserved through Greek and Arabic channels, supporting the Rosicrucian claim to represent a primordial tradition predating sectarian divisions. The scientific discoveries of the period, rather than undermining Rosicrucian philosophy, often seemed to confirm it. The discovery of invisible rays, like X-rays and radio waves, validated the long-standing Rosicrucian teaching about invisible forces permeating space. The development of psychology as a discipline provided new vocabulary for discussing states of consciousness that Rosicrucians had long recognized. Even Darwin's theory of evolution could be interpreted through a Rosicrucian lens as describing the mechanism through which consciousness developed increasingly complex vehicles for its expression as the 19th century drew to a close. Rosicrucianism has successfully transformed itself from a historical curiosity into a living tradition with multiple organizational expressions and thousands of active practitioners. The various Rosicrucian orders had developed sophisticated training programs, established international networks, and created extensive literatures that made their teachings accessible to seekers worldwide. The stage was set for Rosicrucianism's encounter with the radical transformations of the 20th century. The 20th century opened with Rosicrucian organizations firmly established across the Western world. Yet, the convulsions of two world wars, the rise of scientific materialism, and the radical social transformations of the modern era would test these orders in ways their founders never anticipated, rather than disappearing into historical obscurity as many predicted. Rosicrucian groups demonstrated remarkable adaptability, evolving new forms while maintaining essential teachings that had been transmitted through centuries of change. The period between the world wars proved particularly fertile for Rosicrucian development. The trauma of mechanized warfare and social upheaval drove many to seek meaning beyond material progress. In Germany, where the Rosicrucian impulse had first emerged 3 centuries earlier, new expressions arose that attempted to address the spiritual crisis of the age. The Anthroposophical Society, founded by Rudolf Steiner after his break with Theosophy, incorporated significant Rosicrucian elements into its spiritual science. Though Steiner rarely used explicitly Rosicrucian terminology, Steiner's interpretation of Rosicrucian wisdom emphasized its evolutionary character, presenting Christian Rosenkreuz not as a historical figure from the past, but as an ongoing spiritual impulse working through successive incarnations to guide human development. His lectures on Rosicrucian Christianity offered esoteric interpretations of the Gospels that revealed hidden mysteries within familiar narratives. Steiner's practical applications of spiritual science in education, agriculture, and medicine demonstrated how Rosicrucian principles could address concrete modern challenges rather than remaining abstract philosophy. The Waldorf education system, developed from anthroposophical principles, embodied the Rosicrucian ideal of educating the whole human being rather than merely transmitting information. The curriculum's emphasis on artistic expression, practical skills, and age-appropriate developmental stages reflected an understanding of human nature derived from esoteric observation rather than conventional psychology. Biodynamic agriculture, another anthroposophical innovation, applied Rosicrucian concepts of cosmic influences and subtle forces to farming, creating methods that would later influence the organic movement. In France, the Order Kabbalistique de la Rosicrucians, founded by Josephine Péladan and Stanislas de Gaïta in the 1880s, continued to influence artistic and intellectual circles well into the 20th century. This order emphasized the role of art in spiritual development, organizing salons that showcased symbolist paintings, mystical poetry, and musical compositions inspired by esoteric themes. The French Rosicrucian tradition maintained a distinctly aesthetic character, viewing beauty as a pathway to transcendence rather than mere decoration. The Martinism that had emerged from 18th century French Illuminism experienced its own revival, with various orders claiming succession from Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin. These Martinist organizations often incorporated Rosicrucian degrees into their systems, creating complex relationships between different initiatory streams. The emphasis on inner development through meditation and contemplation rather than ceremonial magic appealed to those seeking a more austere path than that offered by orders like the Golden Dawn. World War, the first devastating impact on European civilization, catalyzed new developments in Rosicrucian thought. The war's senseless carnage challenged optimistic views of human progress, while the subsequent Spanish flu pandemic reminded humanity of its vulnerability to invisible forces. Many Rosicrucian teachers interpreted these catastrophes as symptoms of humanity's spiritual illness, requiring healing at levels deeper than political or economic reform could reach. The interwar period saw Rosicrucian organizations expanding their educational activities, establishing correspondence courses, publishing houses, and lecture circuits that brought esoteric teachings to broader audiences. The development of radio technology allowed Rosicrucian teachers to broadcast lectures to listeners who might never attend lodge meetings. This democratization of esoteric knowledge represented a significant departure from traditions of secrecy and selective initiation, though organizations maintained that deeper mysteries still required personal preparation and formal initiation. AMORC, under Harvey Spencer Lewis's leadership, pioneered the use of modern media and marketing techniques to spread Rosicrucian teachings. The order's advertisements in popular magazines, promising to reveal ancient secrets of personal development, attracted thousands of students who might never have encountered esoteric traditions through conventional channels. Lewis's son, Ralph Maxwell Lewis, who succeeded him as imperator, continued this modernizing trend while maintaining connections to traditional symbolism and practice. The rise of psychology as a dominant cultural force prompted Rosicrucian organizations to articulate their teachings in psychological terms. Concepts like the collective unconscious, developed by Carl Jung, who was himself deeply interested in alchemy and Gnosticism, provided new vocabulary for discussing experiences that Rosicrucians had long recognized. Many orders incorporated psychological insights into their training programs, presenting spiritual development as a process of psychological integration rather than supernatural achievement. World War II created new challenges as totalitarian regimes suppressed esoteric organizations they viewed as threats to state authority. Nazi Germany banned Freemasonry in most Rosicrucian orders, though some Nazi leaders paradoxically drew from occult sources in constructing their racial mythology. The war's aftermath, with its revelation of humanity's capacity for mechanized evil, intensified the search for spiritual alternatives to purely material definitions of progress. The post-war period witnessed an explosion of new Rosicrucian organizations, many claiming ancient lineages but clearly responding to contemporary needs. The Lectorium Rosicrucianum, founded in the Netherlands by Jan van Rijkenborg and Catharose de Petrie, presented a Gnostic interpretation of Rosicrucian philosophy that emphasized the radical difference between spiritual and material reality. This order's teachings about the need for fundamental transformation rather than gradual improvement appealed to those disillusioned with conventional approaches to spirituality. The counterculture movements of the 1960s created unprecedented interest in alternative spirituality, with Rosicrucian organizations experiencing rapid growth as young seekers explored Eastern and Western esoteric traditions. The period's emphasis on consciousness expansion through various means, from meditation to psychedelic experimentation, aligned with Rosicrucian teachings about states of awareness beyond ordinary consciousness. Many who began their spiritual journey in the counterculture eventually found their way to Rosicrucian orders seeking more structured approaches to development. The New Age movement that emerged from the counterculture incorporated many Rosicrucian concepts, though often without acknowledgement or awareness of their origins. Ideas about vibrational healing, the power of visualization, and the evolution of consciousness through successive ages directly paralleled Rosicrucian teachings, though expressed in contemporary language. Some Rosicrucian organizations embraced this convergence, while others maintained distance from what they viewed as superficial popularization of profound mysteries. The proliferation of Rosicrucian groups in the late 20th century led to increased efforts at historical scholarship and authentication. Academic historians began serious study of Rosicrucian origins and influence, producing critical editions of primary texts and challenging romantic myths about the tradition's history. This scholarship, while sometimes deflating cherished beliefs about ancient lineages, has ultimately strengthened Rosicrucianism by grounding it in documented history rather than speculation. The establishment of Rosicrucian museums, libraries, and research centers represented another significant development. AMORC's Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum in San Jose became one of the largest collections of Egyptian artifacts in Western North America, supporting the order's claims about Egyptian origins while contributing to public education. Philotheca Philosophica Hermetica in Amsterdam, while not exclusively Rosicrucian, preserved countless manuscripts and early printed works essential to understanding the tradition's development. Educational initiatives expanded beyond correspondence courses to include accredited institutions. The Rosicrucian University International, established by AMORC, offered systematic study in mystical, scientific, and cultural subjects from a Rosicrucian perspective. While not granting conventional degrees, these educational programs provided structured learning opportunities that maintained academic rigor while incorporating esoteric perspectives excluded from mainstream universities. The global reach of modern Rosicrucian organizations reflected broader patterns of cultural globalization. Orders that had originated in Europe or America established lodges in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, adapting their teachings to different cultural contexts while maintaining core symbolism and practices. This international expansion raised questions about the relationship between Rosicrucian wisdom and specific cultural traditions, with some arguing for universal principles underlying diverse expressions and others maintaining the essentially Western character of the tradition. The advent of computer technology and eventually the Internet transformed how Rosicrucian organizations operated and communicated. Online study programs made teachings available to students in remote locations, while email and discussion forums created virtual communities that transcended geographical boundaries. Some orders conducted initiations and rituals through video conferencing, raising debates about whether physical presence was essential to authentic transmission. Traditional practices were not abandoned, but rather supplemented by technological innovations. Many organizations maintained that certain experiences required physical gathering, and initiatory energies could not be fully transmitted through electronic media, and that the subtle influences of sacred space could not be replicated virtually. The challenge became integrating beneficial aspects of technology while preserving essential elements that required direct transmission. The preservation of traditional practices became increasingly important as senior initiates who had received teachings through older methods aged and passed away. Organizations developed archives to preserve not only written materials, but also recordings of rituals, lectures, and demonstrations of techniques that might otherwise be lost. This preservation effort reflected awareness that while Rosicrucian wisdom claimed eternal origins, its specific expressions were historically conditioned and vulnerable to disappearance without conscious effort at transmission. Different organizations developed distinct approaches to preserving and transmitting tradition. Some emphasized exact replication of historical forms, viewing any modification as corruption. Others argued that living tradition required adaptation, that Christian Rosenkreuz himself had synthesized diverse sources rather than merely repeating received wisdom. These different approaches created a rich ecology of Rosicrucian expression, with seekers able to find organizations matching their temperament and understanding. The question of legitimacy and authenticity continued to generate controversy, with various orders claiming to be the only true representatives of Rosicrucian tradition. Legal battles over the right to use the name Rosicrucian occasionally reached civil courts, though judges understandably proved reluctant to adjudicate spiritual authenticity. Most serious students eventually recognized that external authorization mattered less than the quality of teaching and the transformation it produced in practitioners' lives. Beyond the historical narratives and organizational developments lies the beating heart of Rosicrucianism, the inner teachings that have transformed countless lives across centuries. These practices and beliefs carefully guarded, yet gradually revealed to prepared students, constitute a complete system of spiritual development that addresses every aspect of human existence. To understand these inner teachings is to glimpse the practical wisdom that has sustained the Rosicrucian tradition through periods of persecution and popularization alike. The foundation of all Rosicrucian practice rests upon a specific understanding of human nature that sees each individual as a sleeping god, possessing divine potential obscured by ignorance and identification with temporary forms. This is not merely a philosophical proposition, but an observable fact for those who develop the necessary faculties of perception. The practices taught in Rosicrucian orders aim to awaken these dormant faculties, allowing direct experience of spiritual realities rather than mere belief in their existence. Meditation in the Rosicrucian tradition differs from both Eastern contemplative practices and Western prayer, though it incorporates elements of both. The fundamental technique involves what initiates call the creation of mental temples, elaborate visualizations of sacred spaces that serve as laboratories for consciousness. These are not idle fantasies, but precisely constructed thought forms built according to specific principles that align the practitioner's consciousness with cosmic patterns. The aspirant begins by learning to visualize simple geometric forms with perfect clarity, holding the image steady in the mind's eye despite distractions from physical senses or wandering thoughts. This apparently simple exercise develops the will and concentration necessary for more advanced practices. The ability to maintain a clear mental image for extended periods creates a kind of mental screen upon which spiritual perceptions can appear, much as a still lake reflects the sky more clearly than turbulent waters. From simple forms, the student progresses to complex symbolic compositions that encode multiple levels of meaning. A rose might be visualized not merely as a flower, but as a living symbol of unfolding consciousness, its colors shifting from white through red to gold as different aspects are contemplated. The cross becomes not static wood, but a dynamic intersection of forces, pulsing with the tension between vertical aspiration and horizontal extension. Through repeated meditation on these symbols, they become living realities in the practitioner's consciousness, doorways to experiences that transcend ordinary awareness. The technique of assuming the God form, borrowed from Egyptian mysteries and refined through centuries of practice, allows the practitioner to temporarily embody archetypal consciousnesses, by visualizing themselves taking on the appearance and attributes of divine beings or perfected humans. Students learn to access states of consciousness normally beyond their reach. This is understood not as play acting, but as awakening dormant aspects of the psyche that resonate with these archetypal patterns. Breathing exercises form another crucial component of Rosicrucian practice. Based on the understanding that breath carries not merely oxygen, but vital force that can be consciously directed. The rhythm of breathing affects states of consciousness with specific patterns, facilitating meditation, healing, or psychic perception. The practice of rhythmic breathing, while visualizing light or color flowing through the body, creates tangible sensations of energy that skeptics might dismiss as suggestion, but practitioners experience as undeniably real. The middle pillar exercise, adapted from Kabbalistic practices and refined by various Rosicrucian orders, exemplifies the sophisticated integration of breath, visualization, and sound that characterizes advanced techniques. The practitioner visualizes spheres of colored light at specific points along the body's central axis, while intoning divine names or vowel sounds that create resonance at those locations. This practice is said to strengthen the aura, balance the psychic centers, and create a channel through which higher energies can flow into physical manifestation. Healing occupies a central place in Rosicrucian practice, fulfilling the original mandate to heal the sick without accepting payment. This healing works not through opposition to disease, but through strengthening the vital forces that maintain health. Rosicrucian healers learn to perceive the subtle bodies that interpenetrate the physical form, identifying disturbances in these energy fields before they manifest as physical symptoms. The technique of absent healing, practiced collectively by many Rosicrucian orders, demonstrates the tradition's understanding that consciousness transcends spatial limitations. Groups gather at specified times to send healing energy to those who have requested assistance, creating what some describe as a cloud of healing force that recipients can access according to their receptivity. While skeptics attribute any benefits to placebo effects, the consistency of reported experiences across cultures and centuries suggests something more substantial at work. Colored therapy. Based on the understanding that different frequencies of light affect consciousness and vitality in specific ways, provides another healing modality. Each color is understood to carry particular qualities that can strengthen deficient aspects or calm excessive ones. Red stimulates vitality and will. Blue promotes peace and spiritual aspiration. Green facilitates balance and growth. These are not arbitrary associations, but relationships discovered through generations of observation and experimentation. The use of sound in healing extends beyond simple relaxation to specific frequencies and intervals that Rosicrucians claim can affect cellular, vibration, and consciousness simultaneously. The ancient knowledge of sacred proportions in music is preserved through Pythagorean traditions and medieval theorists, finds practical application in compositions designed to facilitate healing, meditation, or spiritual experience. Certain intervals are said to open psychic centers, while others ground excessive energy or dispel negative influences. The doctrine of subtle bodies, or vehicles of consciousness, provides the theoretical framework for understanding how these practices produce their effects. Beyond the physical body exists the etheric double that maintains the physical form, the astral body of emotions and desires, the mental body of thoughts and concepts, and higher vehicles that connect individual consciousness to cosmic sources. Each body has its own requirements for health and development, and Rosicrucian practices address all levels simultaneously. The development of psychic faculties is approached systematically, rather than sensationally, in genuine Rosicrucian training. Clairvoyance, clairaudience, and psychometry are understood not as supernatural gifts, but as natural capacities that emerge when the appropriate vehicles of consciousness are developed and purified. The emphasis remains on service rather than phenomena, with students warned against pursuing psychic development for its own sake or for personal advantage. The practice of retrospection, reviewing the day's events in reverse order before sleep, serves multiple purposes in Rosicrucian discipline. This exercise develops the will through the effort required to maintain backward sequence, strengthens memory and attention, and facilitates the extraction of spiritual lessons from daily experience. Advanced practitioners report that this practice eventually enables conscious awareness during sleep, opening access to experiences in subtle realms that are usually forgotten upon waking. Dream work in the Rosicrucian tradition goes beyond psychological interpretation to include techniques for conscious participation in dream states. Students learn to program dreams through pre-sleep suggestion to maintain awareness while dreaming, and to remember and interpret symbolic communications received during sleep. The dream state is understood as a condition where consciousness naturally operates in subtle bodies, providing opportunities for instruction and experience unavailable to waking consciousness. The concept of cosmic consciousness, central to Rosicrucian philosophy, refers not to a vague sense of unity, but to specific states of awareness where the practitioner directly experiences their connection to all life. These experiences might occur spontaneously during meditation or ritual, but the tradition provides specific practices designed to facilitate their emergence. The key lies not in forcing such experiences, but in preparing the vehicles of consciousness to receive them when cosmic conditions are favorable. Initiation in the Rosicrucian tradition serves functions beyond mere ceremonial admission to an organization. Properly conducted initiations create energetic links between the candidate and the egregore or group mind of the order, providing access to reservoirs of force built up through centuries of practice. The symbols and actions of initiation rituals work on multiple levels simultaneously, impressing the subconscious with patterns that will unfold gradually as the initiate progresses. The process of self-initiation, while controversial among traditionalists who insist on physical transmission, has been developed by various orders for students unable to attend lodge meetings. These procedures typically involve extended periods of preparation, including study, meditation, and moral purification, followed by elaborate rituals performed alone, but timed to coincide with collective workings, while perhaps lacking certain energetic transmissions available through group initiation. Sincere self-initiation can produce profound transformations. The grades or degrees through which students progress represent not arbitrary divisions, but stages of consciousness development with specific characteristics and requirements. Each grade has its particular lessons, challenges, and responsibilities. Advancement depends not on time served or examinations passed, but on genuine transformation verified through observable changes in the student's character, capabilities, and service to humanity. The practice of ritual magic in Rosicrucian orders differs from popular conceptions, focusing on transformation of consciousness rather than production of phenomena. Rituals are understood as dramatic meditations that engage all aspects of the being, from physical movement through emotional involvement to spiritual aspiration. The careful construction of ritual space through ceremonial openings creates conditions where ordinary consciousness naturally gives way to enhanced awareness. The use of ritual implements like wands, swords, cups, and pentacles is based on their symbolic correspondence to aspects of consciousness and cosmic forces. These tools serve as focal points for will and imagination, helping to concentrate and direct energies that might otherwise remain diffuse. The consecration of such implements through repeated use in sacred contexts gradually charges them with force that sensitive individuals can perceive as tangible presence. Prayer in the Rosicrucian context differs from petitionary prayer, focusing instead on alignment with divine will and the circulation of spiritual force. The practice of invoking divine names or qualities is understood to activate corresponding aspects within the practitioner rather than calling upon external entities. This form of prayer becomes a technique for self-transformation, using devotional energy to fuel spiritual development. The daily practices prescribed for Rosicrucian students create a rhythm of spiritual exercise that gradually transforms the entire life. Morning exercises might include greeting the rising sun, not as worship of a physical object, but as acknowledgement of spiritual light. Evening practices often involve retrospection and preparation for the night's inner work. Regular periods of meditation, study, and service create a framework within which spontaneous spiritual experiences can safely emerge. The influence of Rosicrucian thought extends far beyond the boundaries of esoteric orders into the mainstream of Western culture, weaving golden threads through literature, music, art, and even scientific discovery. This cultural penetration occurred sometimes through direct involvement of known Rosicrucians, sometimes through artists and thinkers who absorbed Rosicrucian ideas from the general intellectual atmosphere, and sometimes through mysterious channels that suggest deeper connections than historical documentation can prove. In the realm of literature, the Rosicrucian influence manifests most obviously in works that explicitly reference the brotherhood, but more significantly in those that embody Rosicrucian themes without naming their source. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Faust, perhaps the greatest work of German literature, contains profound Rosicrucian elements woven throughout its narrative of spiritual striving and transformation. Goethe's membership in various esoteric societies and his deep study of alchemy informed his portrayal of Faust's journey from dissatisfaction with conventional knowledge through magical experimentation to ultimate redemption. The scene in Faust where the protagonist encounters the earth spirit exemplifies Rosicrucian concepts of elemental forces as conscious beings with whom humans can interact. Faust's translation of the opening of John's Gospel, wrestling with whether to render logos as word, thought, power, or deed, reflects the Rosicrucian understanding of creation through divine emanation. The entire drama can be read as an alchemical allegory, with Faust undergoing the stages of spiritual transformation that lead from base materiality to golden illumination. Edward Bulwer-Lytton, the Victorian novelist and occultist, created works that brought Rosicrucian ideas to popular audiences who might never have encountered them directly. His novel, Zanone, presents the story of an immortal Rosicrucian adept who has transcended death through alchemical achievement, but faces the challenge of love's power to bind him to mortality. The novel's portrayal of the dweller on the threshold, a terrifying guardian that must be faced during initiation, introduced a concept that would influence occult thought for generations. The strange case of Shakespeare's possible Rosicrucian connections has generated extensive speculation, with some researchers claiming to find Rosicrucian symbolism encoded in the plays, particularly The Tempest, with its magician protagonist who achieves transformation through art, while direct evidence remains elusive. The timing of Shakespeare's later works coincides with the initial publication of the Rosicrucian manifestos, and the themes of transformation, hidden wisdom, and the power of imagination that permeate his works aligned remarkably with Rosicrucian philosophy. The Romantic poets, particularly Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Blake, ABSORBED, Rosicrucian ideas through their reading of Jacob Boehme, Robert Flood, and other esoteric philosophers. Blake's elaborate personal mythology, with its emphasis on imagination as the divine faculty in humanity, reflects Rosicrucian teachings about the creative power of consciousness. His image of Jerusalem being built in England's green and pleasant land echoes the Rosicrucian vision of establishing the New Jerusalem through spiritual transformation rather than political revolution. In the 20th century, William Butler Yeats brought his Golden Dawn training directly into his poetry, creating works layered with esoteric symbolism accessible to initiates while remaining powerful for general readers. His poem, The Second Coming, with its gyres and rough beasts slouching toward Bethlehem, draws from his understanding of cosmic cycles derived from Rosicrucian and related traditions. The rose appears throughout his work not merely as a natural image, but as the multivalent symbol of spiritual unfoldment he had encountered in his esoteric studies. The novelists of the early 20th century who formed the Inklings group at Oxford, including C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, while not explicitly Rosicrucian, created fantasies that embody Rosicrucian themes of hidden knowledge, initiation, and the struggle between forces of light and darkness. Lewis's Space trilogy presents a cosmos populated by conscious planetary spirits remarkably similar to those described in Rosicrucian cosmology. Tolkien's Middle-earth, with its wizards, rings of power, and the theme of small individuals accomplishing cosmic purposes, resonates with Rosicrucian ideas about the hidden influences shaping human destiny. Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum, published in 1988, brought Rosicrucian themes to contemporary literary fiction, weaving a complex narrative about publishers who create a fictional conspiracy involving Templars, Rosicrucians, and other esoteric groups, only to find their fiction taking on dangerous reality. The novel serves simultaneously as a critique of conspiracy thinking and a sophisticated exploration of the human need for mystery and meaning that Rosicrucian traditions address. The realm of music. The influence of Rosicrucian thought on composition and theory extends from the Renaissance through contemporary times. The concept of music as a vehicle for spiritual transformation, central to Rosicrucian practice, influenced composers who sought to create works that would affect consciousness rather than merely please the ear. The mathematical relationships between musical intervals, explored by Rosicrucian theorists as reflections of cosmic harmony, has provided foundation for developments in Western musical theory. Mozart's The Magic Flute stands as perhaps the most explicitly initiatory opera in the Western canon, its libretto filled with Masonic and Rosicrucian symbolism. The trials of Tamino and Pamina through fire and water, their passage from darkness to light, and the conflict between the Queen of the Night and Sarastro embodied the journey of initiation as understood in 18th century esoteric orders. The opera functions not merely as entertainment, but as a mystery play designed to prepare audiences for spiritual transformation. Eric Satie, the eccentric French composer, served as unofficial composer for the Order Kabbalistique de la Rosicrucians, creating austere, mystical works for their ceremonies. His sonores de la Rose plus Croix eschewed conventional harmonic progression in favor of parallel fourths and fifths that evoked medieval sacred music, attempting to create sonic spaces where ordinary consciousness would naturally shift toward contemplative states. His influence on Debussy and Ravel brought esoteric sensibilities into the mainstream of French Impressionist music. Alexander Scriabin, the Russian composer and mystic, developed an elaborate system correlating colors with musical tones, scheming to create synesthetic experiences that would facilitate spiritual evolution. His unfinished Mysterium was conceived as a week-long ceremony combining music, dance, color, and scent that would bring about the transformation of humanity. While Scriabin's system was idiosyncratic, his vision of music as a transformative force aligned with Rosicrucian concepts of vibrational healing and consciousness expansion. The influence on visual arts appears most dramatically in the symbolic paintings of the Renaissance and Baroque periods, where artists encoded Hermetic and Rosicrucian teachings in works ostensibly depicting biblical or mythological scenes. Botticelli's Primavera has been interpreted as an alchemical allegory, its figures representing stages of transformation hidden beneath the surface narrative of classical mythology. The precise botanical accuracy of the flowers suggests not mere decoration, but specific symbolic meanings known to initiated viewers. The architectural monuments that embody Rosicrucian principles extend beyond obvious examples, like Rosicrucian temples, to include structures whose builders incorporated sacred geometry and symbolic programs derived from esoteric traditions. The Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, built in the 15th century, contains symbolic carvings that have been interpreted as encoding Rosicrucian, Templar, and Masonic mysteries, though its construction predates the public emergence of Rosicrucianism by more than a century. The Palace of Versailles, designed during the height of French interest in Hermeticism, incorporates solar symbolism and geometric proportions that reflect Louis XIV's image as the Sun King, but also encode deeper esoteric meanings about divine kingship and cosmic order. The garden's elaborate geometric patterns, viewed from above, create mandalas that serve as meditation devices for those who understand their significance. In America, the architecture of Washington, D.C. has been analyzed for its esoteric symbolism, with the street layout, monument placement, toned, and building design allegedly incorporating Masonic and Rosicrucian principles. Whether intentionally designed or retrospectively interpreted, these patterns demonstrate how Rosicrucian ideas about sacred space and geometric harmony influenced American civic architecture. The scientific pioneers who drew inspiration from Rosicrucian sources challenged conventional narratives about the opposition between science and esotericism. Hans Kepler, whose laws of planetary motion founded modern astronomy, was deeply influenced by Hermetic and Rosicrucian ideas about cosmic harmony. His search for the music of the spheres, the mathematical relationships governing planetary orbits, emerged from conviction that God had encoded divine proportions in creation that human reason could discover. Michael Faraday, the pioneering researcher of electricity and magnetism, while not explicitly Rosicrucian, belonged to a mystical Christian sect called the Sandemanians and understood his scientific work as revealing divine operations in nature. His concept of fields of force surrounding magnets and electric charges introduced ideas remarkably similar to Rosicrucian teachings about invisible influences permeating space. The influence extends into modern physics, where concepts that once seemed purely esoteric have found scientific expression. The idea that consciousness affects physical reality, central to Rosicrucian practice, finds echo in quantum mechanics' observer effect, the holographic universe theory, suggesting that every part contains information about the whole. Parallels the Hermetic axiom as above, so below that Rosicrucians have contemplated for centuries. Contemporary artists continue to draw from Rosicrucian sources, though often without acknowledgement or perhaps awareness. The visionary art movement, creating images of spiritual experiences and alternate realities, employs symbolic languages and techniques of consciousness alteration that derive from esoteric traditions. Digital artists use fractal geometry and sacred proportions to create works that affect consciousness in ways Rosicrucian theorists would recognize. The film industry has produced numerous works incorporating Rosicrucian themes, from the explicitly esoteric, like The Ninth Gate, to mainstream successes, like The Matrix, with its Gnostic narrative of awakening from illusion. These popular culture expressions, while often simplifying or sensationalizing esoteric concepts, demonstrate the continued hunger for the transformative narratives that Rosicrucianism provides. Architecture continues to embody Rosicrucian principles in contemporary buildings designed according to sacred geometric principles. The Gothic in Switzerland, designed by Rudolf Steiner as the headquarters of the Anthroposophical Society, creates organic spaces that seem to breathe with life, their curves and proportions designed to affect consciousness of those who enter. Modern Rosicrucian temples incorporate both traditional symbolism and contemporary design elements, creating spaces where ancient wisdom meets current aesthetic sensibilities. The influence of Rosicrucian thought on garden design created landscapes intended as three-dimensional mandalas for walking meditation. The tradition of the memory palace, where information is encoded in imagined architectural spaces, influenced both garden design and educational theory. These gardens serve not merely as pleasant spaces, but as initiation grounds where the prepared visitor can experience transformation through movement through symbolically charged space. As humanity stands at the threshold of unprecedented technological transformation and ecological crisis, the ancient wisdom of the Rose Cross reveals itself not as an antiquated relic, but as a vital framework for navigating the complexities of the 21st century and beyond. The challenges facing contemporary civilization, from climate change to artificial intelligence, from social fragmentation to the search for meaning in a materialistic age, find unexpected resonance with teachings developed centuries before these issues emerged in their current forms. The convergence between cutting-edge science and ancient Rosicrucian teachings grows more remarkable with each passing year. Quantum physics, with its revelation that consciousness plays a fundamental role in physical reality, validates what Rosicrucian adepts have long taught about the power of directed thought to influence material conditions. The observer effect, demonstrating that the act of measurement affects what is measured, provides scientific framework for understanding practices like distant healing and ritual work that once seemed to violate physical laws. The discovery of quantum entanglement, where particles remain connected across vast distances, offers a mechanism for understanding the bonds between initiator and initiate, the connections within group meditations, and the reality of the invisible college that transcends physical separation. Scientists speak of non-locality and action at a distance in terms that would have been familiar to Renaissance magi, though expressed in mathematical rather than symbolic language. Neuroscience's exploration of consciousness has revealed brain states associated with mystical experiences, meditation, and expanded awareness that Rosicrucians have cultivated through specific practices. The discovery of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself throughout life, validates the Rosicrucian teaching that consciousness can be systematically developed rather than remaining fixed by genetics or early conditioning. Brain imaging of experienced meditators shows structural changes that correlate with the enhanced capacities Rosicrucian training claims to develop. The field of epigenetics demonstrates that environmental factors and conscious practices can affect gene expression, passing changes to future generations. This scientific finding parallels Rosicrucian teachings about the transformation of the subtle bodies, affecting not only the individual, but contributing to the evolution of humanity as a whole. The practices preserved in Rosicrucian orders may literally be changing human DNA. accelerating the evolution of consciousness at the biological level. Contemporary psychology's recognition of the collective unconscious archetypal patterns and the importance of symbolism in psychological development validates methodologies Rosicrucians have employed for centuries. The use of visualization, ritual, and symbolic meditation in modern therapeutic contexts demonstrates the practical value of techniques preserved in esoteric traditions. Transpersonal psychology explicitly acknowledges spiritual dimensions of human experience that Rosicrucian psychology has always addressed. The ecological crisis confronting humanity finds Rosicrucian philosophy offering both diagnosis and potential remedy. The Hermetic understanding of humanity as microcosm of the macrocosm implies that human consciousness and planetary health are intimately connected. The destruction of natural environments reflects a corresponding degradation in human spiritual awareness, while healing the earth requires not merely technological solutions, but transformation of consciousness that recognizes the sacred nature of material existence. Rosicrucian orders worldwide have embraced environmental activism as a natural extension of their spiritual practice. The understanding that all life is interconnected, that consciousness permeates nature, and that humanity bears responsibility as conscious participants in evolution motivates ecological engagement that transcends political ideology. Gardens at Rosicrucian centers demonstrate sustainable practices while serving as living mandalas for meditation and healing. Work directed toward planetary restoration. The concept of planetary healing through group meditation, long practiced by Rosicrucian organizations, gains new relevance as scientific studies document the effects of focused intention on physical systems. The Global Consciousness Project at Princeton University has documented correlations between major world events and random number generators, suggesting that collective human consciousness affects physical reality in measurable ways. Rosicrucian groups conducting synchronized meditations for world peace and healing may be participating in phenomena that science is only beginning to understand. The digital revolution presents both opportunities and challenges for Rosicrucian transmission. Virtual reality technologies offer possibilities for creating immersive symbolic experiences that could enhance traditional initiation rituals. Artificial intelligence might assist in personalizing spiritual instruction, identifying patterns in student development, and preserving teachings in forms that adapt to individual learning styles. Yet, these technologies also raise questions about the role of human transmission, the importance of physical presence, and the dangers of reducing spiritual development to algorithmic processes. The Internet has democratized access to esoteric knowledge in ways the original Rosicrucians could never have imagined. Texts, once available only to initiates, can be downloaded instantly. Lectures from teachers worldwide can be accessed on demand, and seekers can connect across continents to share experiences and insights. This accessibility fulfills the Rosicrucian ideal of making wisdom available to all prepared souls, though it also creates challenges in maintaining quality, preventing distortion, and ensuring proper preparation for powerful practices. Blockchain technology offers intriguing possibilities for creating decentralized networks that preserve and transmit esoteric knowledge without central authority, perhaps realizing the original vision of an invisible college more fully than physical organizations ever could. Smart contracts could automate certain aspects of great advancement based on demonstrated achievement rather than human judgment. Though the essential element of consciousness transmission would still require human involvement, the emergence of global consciousness through instant communication and shared challenges creates conditions where Rosicrucian ideals of universal brotherhood and planetary transformation become not merely spiritual aspirations, but practical necessities. Climate change, pandemic disease, canemic interdependence force recognition that humanity shares a common destiny requiring cooperation, transcending national, religious, and cultural boundaries. Rosicrucian organizations have adapted to this global reality by developing international networks that preserve regional traditions while fostering planetary consciousness. online conferences bring together practitioners from every continent, sharing perspectives that enrich understanding while maintaining core principles. The rose and cross prove capable of bearing meanings that resonate across cultures, with Asian, African, and indigenous practitioners finding their own wisdom traditions reflected and enhanced through Rosicrucian symbolism. The question of cultural appropriation versus universal wisdom challenges contemporary Rosicrucian orders to examine their European roots while recognizing that spiritual truth transcends cultural boundaries. The Egyptian elements in Rosicrucian tradition, the incorporation of Kabbalah from Jewish sources, and the influence of Islamic alchemy demonstrate that the tradition has always been synthetic. Contemporary practitioners must navigate between respecting cultural origins and recognizing that spiritual wisdom belongs to all humanity. The rise of spiritual but not religious seekers creates a natural audience for Rosicrucian teachings that offer structured spiritual development without dogmatic belief systems. The scientific framework that many Rosicrucian orders employ, presenting their teachings as hypotheses to be tested through experience rather than doctrines to be accepted on faith, appeals to those who reject traditional religion but recognize dimensions of existence beyond material reality. The mental health crisis affecting developed nations, with epidemic levels of depression, anxiety, and existential despair, reveals the cost of severing connection to transcendent meaning. Rosicrucian practices offer tools for psychological integration and spiritual purpose that complement without replacing professional mental health treatment. The emphasis on gradual development through graded practices provides structure and hope for those feeling lost in a chaotic world. The longevity revolution, with humans living longer than ever before, creates new opportunities for spiritual development that requires decades of patient practice. The extended lifespans that Rosicrucian adepts allegedly achieved through alchemical means become metaphorically available to all through medical advances, providing time for the slow work of consciousness transformation that the tradition has always emphasized. Artificial intelligence and potential technological singularities raise questions about consciousness, identity, and human purpose that Rosicrucian philosophy uniquely addresses. The tradition's teaching about multiple bodies or vehicles of consciousness provides framework for understanding how human awareness might interface with artificial systems while maintaining essential identity. The goal of developing consciousness independent of physical form, long pursued through Rosicrucian practices, gains new relevance in an age contemplating mind, uploading, and digital immortality. The space age opens frontiers that early Rosicrucians could only imagine. Yet, their cosmology anticipated consciousness existing throughout the universe. As humanity prepares for potential contact with non-terrestrial intelligence, Rosicrucian teachings about planetary spirits and cosmic hierarchies offer frameworks for understanding its consciousness that transcends human form. 4. The practices for developing cosmic consciousness prepare practitioners for expanded perspectives that space exploration demands. Looking toward the future, Rosicrucianism faces the challenge of maintaining authentic transmission while adapting to rapidly changing conditions. The tradition's survival through centuries of change suggests remarkable resilience. But the pace of contemporary transformation exceeds anything previously experienced. Its orders must balance preservation of essential teachings with innovation that keeps the tradition relevant and accessible. The perennial philosophy that Rosicrucianism represents, the conviction that spiritual truth underlies all genuine religious and mystical traditions, positions it well for an increasingly pluralistic world. Rather than competing with other traditions, Rosicrucian wisdom can serve as a bridge, helping seekers recognize universal principles expressed through diverse forms. The rose blooming upon the cross becomes a symbol not of exclusive truth, but of the flowering of consciousness wherever proper conditions exist. The eternal rose of the title suggests that while forms change, the essential wisdom Rosicrucianism transmits remains constant. The specific practices organizational structures, and symbolic languages may evolve. But the core teaching about human divine potential and the possibility of conscious evolution continues to inspire seekers. Each generation must rediscover and reinterpret these teachings, finding new applications for ancient principles. The democratic ideals that emerged partially from Rosicrucian influence now face challenges from authoritarian movements worldwide. The Rosicrucian vision of human dignity, spiritual equality, and the sovereignty of individual consciousness provides philosophical foundation for resistance to oppression while maintaining hope for human transformation rather than mere political revolution. The tradition's emphasis on inner development as prerequisite for outer change offers alternative to both passive acceptance and violent rebellion. As humanity approaches potential transformation through technology, environmental crisis, or evolutionary leap, the Rosicrucian tradition stands ready to offer its accumulated wisdom, the practices for developing consciousness, the frameworks for understanding reality's multiple dimensions, and the vision of human divine potential provide tools for navigating whatever changes await. The Invisible College continues its work, whether through formal organizations or spontaneous emergence wherever sincere seekers gather. The rose continues to bloom upon the cross, its petals unfolding to reveal ever deeper mysteries, while its roots sink deeper into the eternal ground of being. New seekers approach the tradition, some through established orders, others through books and websites, still others through direct inspiration that bypasses all external forms. The work continues, the transmission persists, and the promise remains that those who seek shall find, those who knock shall have doors opened, and those who persist shall achieve the stone of the wise, the quest for the philosopher's stone, understood not as material gold, but as transformed consciousness capable of transmuting experience into wisdom, remains as relevant today as when Christian Rosenkreuz allegedly walked the earth, in a world desperately needing healing, wisdom, and transformation. The Rose Cross stands not as an anachronistic symbol, but as living promise that human consciousness can evolve, that wisdom can illuminate darkness, and that love can transform even the harshest realities into beauty. The eternal rose blooms still, offering its fragrance to all who have senses to perceive it.